This is Dave Markel. This week, I'm honored to bring to you my compelling conversation with Victor Lyons, an expert in trauma recovery. If you're suffering from chronic post traumatic stress, this episode could change your life. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. This is episode 138. And as I mentioned, my guest this week is Victor Lyons. If you've listened to Derrick Hurley and Caitlin Hurley's episodes, you've heard them mention how Victor has helped them both in tremendous ways. I don't want to take any more time away from your opportunity to listen to Victor, so let's get to it, and I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Victor. Victor Lyons, I am thrilled and honored that you've joined me.
Thank you for having me.
For my audience, I'll just let you know real quick, Victor is someone that I've been wanting on since I did my interview with Derrick Hurley. Derrick told the story and was even joined by his daughter, Caitlin, who was raped in Antigua while she was a nursing student several years ago. As a result of that, the trauma that was incurred by Derrick as vicarious trauma, but also active trauma, just doing what he was doing, trying to get his daughter's case investigated and prosecuted, was very traumatic. And also Caitlin has utilized Victor. Derrick found Victor and started getting treatment from him. He talks about it very openly, and he spoke very highly of you, Victor. And recently I've had another guest on the show, Leslie McFadden, who also is a recent client and talked very highly of you. Victor, if you would, give us some background about yourself, then we'll go into what it is that you do in terms of trauma treatment.
Okay, going back in time to when I was young, I grew up in a household in the north of England, and my family were Jewish, and we were very aware because of my age. I was born 4 years after the end of World War II. It was becoming increasingly obvious what had happened during the war, partially not just to my family, but my father's friends and people like that. For instance, when I was 7, I remember watching a documentary about the concentration camps. And I was sitting in the living room on my own, watching this on my own at the age of 7, seeing the piles of dead bodies and the piles of glasses and the piles of gold teeth and all the rest of it. I mean, that was a trauma in itself. And then I remember when a few years later going on a holiday to the Netherlands with my father and mother and brother, and sitting listening to a conversation between my father and one of his old Dutch friends about all their friends and family and what had happened to them during the war. And what happened to so-and-so? Oh, died in the camps. What happened to so-and-so? Died in the camps, over and over again. So this was an awareness that I had growing up. I myself had a non-traumatic, totally event-free childhood. I mean, I had nice parents, not short of anything. It was absolutely fine. But all these things going on in the world around me, and I took a very keen interest in politics, and I still do. We had family members who were prominent politicians and prominent legal experts and things like that.
Sure.
So the question always was, why do people behave the way they do? And another memory I have is at the age of 8, sitting with my best friend at the dinner table with his parents. And they said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" My best friend Lionel says, "I want to be a brain surgeon." And I said, "I want to be a psychiatrist because I want to find out why people behave the way they do." And that trait has been with me ever since. So I actually started in medical school so I could become a psychiatrist, but realized that spending day after day after day dissecting bodies wasn't going to tell me how the mind worked. So I switched to psychology. And then after that, the next thing was to find out, because in those days, clinical psychology wasn't really particularly developed in the same way as medicine was. Well, it still isn't really. It's still way behind in terms of effectiveness. So the next thing was to find out who in the world was proficient at curing all these mental traumas that I saw around me. One of my friend's fathers had not only had he been in Auschwitz, but he escaped from Auschwitz and got captured by the Russians, who sent him to Siberia. He had a double set of traumas. And then you've got all these different strange personalities. Maybe you're probably not connected with trauma, but people behaving in a very strange way. We know with this big extended family, of course, in any close family, you've got lots of gossip, mostly gossip. So and so, oh, what did you say that? Oh dear, why did he behave the way he did? Why? It's just fascinating. And formal psychology training did not teach you why people behave the way they do. They gave you some hints and tips, but there was still no why. What is going on here? Why are some people happy and some people unhappy? That was one of the key questions. I just talked to people, wrote to people, visited people, did this tour, if you like, of prominent psychologists and psychiatrists in London and elsewhere. And to say, what about this? What's your success rate with that? How do you cure this? What do we know about that? And what was alarming was the fact that, first of all, the main figures in psychology, psychiatry, in terms of how people behave and how people think, like Freud, Jung, they'd never been proved experimentally. Nowadays, there is a bit of proof on some of the aspects of what they've done. And then you go and talk to psychiatrists and psychologists and say, what's your success rate? Oh, we don't talk about success rate. I mean, to this day, if I use the word cure with any of the psychologists or psychiatrists I'm talking to, it's like, oh, it's a dirty word. If I've got a gallbladder problem or a prostate problem or a heart problem or something, I go and see a doctor, I expect either they're going to cure me or they're going to tell me it's a chronic condition and this is how to live with it. But I expect one or the other, or I've got 3 months to live. In mental health, why is the success rate so much lower than regular medicine? I think the answer is political. I'm not certain, but for instance, take PTSD. PTSD, in my opinion, is one of the easiest conditions to address. Now, most psychologists will disagree with that. So, I publish results of all my clients on my website, time after time, every single one. You can go on my website, you press results, and you will see time after time, I do pre-assessments and post-assessments. This is how they were before. This is how they were afterwards. This is how many sessions. And look, afterwards, nearly all of them no longer have PTSD. That's not me. It's the techniques. I've been around the world, if you like, looking for the experts, looking for the best techniques, melding them together to get to this point where more than 40 years after I started doing this, I can now say, if you've got PTSD, there's a pretty good chance you're no longer going to have PTSD after I've spoken to you.
And that includes complex PTSD also, I'm assuming.
Very rarely have I met somebody with PTSD who didn't have complex PTSD, because the whole point about PTSD is traumas come in chains, okay? So this trauma you had last month sits on top of that trauma you had 5 years ago, sits on top of that. So in other words, they go back in time.
Cumulative.
Cumulative, exactly. So just about all trauma is A, cumulative, and B, complex in the definition of it. The whole point of what I do and my friends and colleagues do is we go back and find the root trauma. Once we've addressed the root trauma, all the subsequent ones go poof.
Well, that's an interesting approach, something I've never heard before. If you could, is there any way to talk about this without revealing or giving up the technique that people need to come to you for?
Oh, I'm perfectly happy to tell anybody about the technique. I don't want to keep it a secret.
Okay.
In fact, I'm an evangelist for this. I spend half my time training other people to do this stuff. And most of that is done pro bono with communities in the middle of nowhere in India or West Africa or East Africa or South Africa or whatever. The other half of the time, I do my private practice and I charge so much an hour like everybody else. Sure. But that helps me fund what I really want to do, which is train as many people as possible.
I love that.
If you look at the total number of people with mental health issues, I'm not talking schizophrenia or the psychosis or bipolar. That's a specialized area I don't go to. Okay. I'm talking about trauma, and trauma includes anxiety, depression, panic attacks, all that kind of thing, PTSD. That's the majority of mental health problems. And I don't know, 5, 10%, the figures vary, but let's say 10% of the world's population has a mental health problem they really need addressing and could benefit from some sessions. If you look at the total number of mental health professionals who can do something about that, it's nowhere near. I mean, it's just, these figures just don't add up. The standard route, particularly in the States, for training a mental health professional is, you do a bachelor's degree, you do a master's degree, you do a PhD if necessary. It takes years and years and years, and the cost is astronomical. So this just isn't feasible. If we want to address the world's mental health problems, I get up in the morning, I think about things on a global scale because I've done big scale stuff. And once you've done big scale stuff, you don't want to go back to small scale stuff. It's important to find a way of handling trauma that doesn't require years and years of training and gazillion dollars. And that's what my mission is, to find that. And that's what I spend all day, every day doing effectively, is trying to find a way that I can train people who aren't mental health professionals to work with their friends and family and colleagues and teach them how to cure PTSD, depression, anxiety, etc. And I'm succeeding to some extent with that. I've got lots more to go and there's lots of problems on the way, but that's what I'm trying to do.
What is your educational background for this?
I'm a polymath. Let me explain. When I was 8, I got this scholarship that effectively it meant I was the smartest kid in the catchment area of 1 million people.
Wow.
My father was happy because it meant he didn't have to pay school fees to the best school in the area.
Sure.
And even better was the fact that my brother got in free because I was already in there. So he sits there counting out how much money he's saving and he's delighted. But as far as the rest of the world, this is like a big deal. So I was aware of the fact that I thought differently. There's all sorts of things go with this, like to some extent I have Asperger's, but I learned how to overcome any dysfunction of Asperger's to the point where it's actually an advantage. I have less bias than most people. I study more subjects than most people. I'm still learning all sorts of stuff. And I just see things differently from a lot of people. So one of the things I did was, as I say, I went and talked to lots of psychologists and psychiatrists, including famous ones like R.D. Laing. In my day, he was the most famous psychiatrist in the UK, if not the world, because he'd come out with a new way of handling psychosis, a whole new model, a whole new way of looking at psychosis, which says this is not disease, this is a process you have to go through. He helped me enormously. And I actually went to see him because the Mental Health Act was being revised in the UK Parliament. And I went to see him and I said, look, you're my hero. The mental health treatment in the UK is pretty damn awful, mostly. And what can we do about it? How can we improve it? And he says, right. He gave me this kind of afternoon seminar on what can we do about the British establishment's attitude to mental health and how we can fix it. And he sent his son to work with me. It was extraordinary. We actually got 3 clauses in the Mental Health Act in Parliament changed for the better so that mental health treatments improved. That was one thing. The next thing was I went to see Professor Hans Eysenck, who, again, probably the most famous psychologist in the UK. He sold more books than anybody else. And he gave an afternoon seminar on how to do testing and how to do research studies, which has inspired me ever since. So from these sources, I learned things you should do to get treatments into the mainstream, to improve the quality of treatments. One of the things I do is don't call them treatments. I don't use the word therapy either. What I'm doing, I'm trying to find a whole new model to help mental health, and I call it coaching because it's a neutral word. Because if you go and say the word therapy in some areas of Africa and some areas of India, they run a mile. They don't want to know because it implies that they're mentally ill, and that's a massive stigma.
Can you give us in a nutshell how you developed this PTSD coaching technique?
Yeah, I didn't develop it. I had friends in California as well as the UK, and they, as a team, developed most of these techniques. I just carry them out. And that's the beauty of the tech. It's not me and it's not whoever the practitioner is. It's not them. It's the technique. The technique works. So this is around the time of Vietnam War veterans in your country were committing suicide in rather large numbers, and the Vietnam War was still a collective trauma in the US. One of my friends had a neighbor who was a Vietnam War vet, who was the first person to have this technique called TIR, traumatic incident reduction. And it worked brilliantly. And then all of us started using this technique in various countries, and we're still using it. What we're doing today is still almost the same as what they developed 40 years ago. There is a group of trauma techniques called prolonged exposure, where you're basically rubbing the person's nose in it. You're getting them to re-experience the trauma. And they're called prolonged exposure. And if you read the research papers, they're probably the most effective techniques. This is a specialized form of prolonged exposure, TIR, where you're looking at this model of trauma as a chain of incidents, and you're looking for the root incident and you want to blow the root incident. And that makes the difference between other prolonged exposure techniques. And also the wording, the way we use it, makes it totally safe for the client to go back and relive what went on and feel comfortable doing it and feel safe doing it.
Help me understand then, is what you're talking about when you talk about the re-experiencing and rubbing their nose in it, so to speak, you're actually causing the brain then to re-experience the trauma, but with a different out.
What you're trying to do is catharsize it. So that you tell the client, there's a video in your head of this incident. What you're going to do is you're going to watch the video and you're going to tell me what happened. That's the essence of it. But let's say it was somebody who got shot in Afghanistan. There's no guns in the room now. All you're doing is watching a video. You're not going to get shot. You're just watching a video. It might be kind of a very seriously heavy video, but you're just watching a video. And because we make a very safe environment for the client, we don't pass any opinions. We don't tell them what to think. We just ask them to watch that video. And the way we do it, it makes the brain comfortable with doing that 99% of the time so that they can do this. So they go over it and then they tell you what happened. And then they go over it again and tell you what happened. And then they go over it again and tell you what happened. But what happens on each retelling is different details come in and go out. It doesn't stay the same. Some of it fades away, some of it gets more intense, but overall, it will gradually, over time, over the retellings, get less intense. The emotional charge will drain away until its emotional charge is almost zilch. So you know the incident happened, but you're no longer being triggered while you're talking about it. And it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter, and eventually it gets to the point where no, emotional charge is gone. Thank you very much. Goodbye. That's it. But sometimes it depends on the type of incident, but sometimes what happens is that it will get worse, or it will get heavier, or it sticks, or getting more intense, and it's not getting any lighter. And at which point you say, is there an earlier similar incident? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, yes. And then you're going down the chain of traumas, you see. And then you do that one. And then that sticks. You say, is there an earlier similar incident? And you find another one earlier. So in that session, you will eventually get to an incident where everything goes poof. Even with when there's one incident, the client comes back next week and there's another incident, which his awareness has now increased. So he can now access it, which he couldn't access before. So even though it's spread out over several sessions, you're still going down the chain of traumas.
That is so interesting. Makes me wonder then, what is going on in the brain? Do you even bother yourself with the brain processes?
This is not my area of expertise. I cannot give you a definitive answer on that. I have colleagues probably who could, but it's not something I'm going to give an opinion on.
Okay.
If I had the time, I would try and find the answers about the neurophysiology of this or do some research on it.
It's pretty much neither here nor there at this point. If it works and the technique is successful, it works. Then why worry about anything else?
We have a theoretical model. We have a theoretical base. But that theoretical base might be completely wrong. The point is, most of what I care about is, has my client got less trauma after I finish than when I started? And that's all the client cares about as well. In terms of theoretical base, this is important because although this technique was developed over 40 years ago, a book came out in 2003 by a Nobel Prize winning psychologist called Daniel Kahneman. And he said, this is how the mind works. We have a fast mind and we have a slow mind. And the fast mind is there for emergencies, which means that if you're being shot up in Afghanistan, those memories are going to go into the fast mind. And the fast mind isn't very analytical. In fact, it's not particularly logical at all. It's just there to react quickly. And that's why triggers are irrational. So you can have an incident 10 years ago and you get triggered 10 years later and you can't quite work out why you got triggered, but you know you got triggered because the trigger isn't logical. And Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, explains this. And so Move to 2003, now 25 years after these techniques were developed, we now have a theoretical base. When I read this book, it was, oh, now I understand why this works.
I see.
So it's a book I can recommend to everybody.
Sure. Victor, does this technique then work with any type of trauma? I would imagine, is what you're saying, that whether it's psychological, physical, both. I can put a personal spin on this. My father was psychologically, emotionally abusive to me. He used to make fun of me, tease me a lot to the point of shame. And I feel some trauma left over from that. Will this technique then work for that type of trauma as well as, say, a physical trauma like rape or sexual assault?
Oh, sure. Most of my clients have not had a physical incident. They've had, I would say, I don't know, 60%, something like that. Their problem is they've had emotional abuse from a parent or emotional abuse from a spouse. That can be more traumatizing than being shot up in a war zone or being in a car accident or being in a burning building or something, because it's a relationship where there was repeated traumas day after day after day after day after day in terms of emotional abuse. Mm-hmm. But the technique's pretty much the same. Okay. Slight variations, but pretty much the same, no matter what the type of trauma is. The principle's exactly the same.
Is there an average number of treatments that most people go through in terms of getting to a curative point, or does that vary?
Well, this is interesting. My personal average, because I keep stats on everything, is 8.4 sessions per client. So let's say 9.
Okay.
But I have people in the US who are dealing solely with American clients. It's more. Their average is more. Now, what I've noticed is when I'm dealing with clients in West Africa, South Africa, East Africa, they're much less. And they can be really, really serious traumas, but they need less sessions before they say, oh, I'm fine now, goodbye. I have no idea what the answer is to this. I know Americans talk more. That might be something to do with it, or they may ruminate more on their inner feeling. That's a strong possibility. I just don't know. I welcome all suggestions.
Victor, how many clients do you personally carry at any given time? And do you find yourself overwhelmed with the number of clients who want to work specifically with you?
No, I wish I did. I average about 6 at a time because all the clients come from word of mouth. Now, most people who want to go and get their mental health sorted don't tell anybody else. So they go and see somebody like me, but they haven't actually told anybody else. When they finish and they say it's marvelous, thank you very much, goodbye, I say, well, tell your friends. Oh, no, I haven't told anybody that I've seen you. So that's one problem. But the ones who do, they go and they've only got a certain number of people in their circle of friends who need to or want to have this kind of attention. There's a limit. If you're in private practice doing word of mouth, there's a limit to how many people you will get. It's just a mathematical thing. Whereas most therapists, as I say, I don't call myself a therapist, I call myself a coach, but most therapists are actually working in a practice where clients are being sent to them. So they're working in a health clinic, working with a hospital or something like that. So they'll have kind of a schedule done for them. I'm in a different situation, but I don't mind only having an average of 6 clients a week because I spend the rest of the time, developing techniques, writing stuff, building apps, and doing the trainings and talking to NGOs around the world who want to have this kind of training.
Do you do this coaching both virtually, like we are right now on Riverside, or do they have to have an in-person session for this to be successful?
No. Right now, I've got one client in Indonesia, one client in California, one client in the UK, one client in Spain, one client, I think every single one this week is in a different country. Thank God for Zoom. My life changed complete with Zoom. But the upside was that we now mastered the art of how to do sessions and how to do training on Zoom. So nearly all my work now is done on Zoom.
Derrick told me that you had started this type of treatment capability in, I believe it was Miami, with the Miami Police Department.
Right. I'll give you the full sequence. I started in London when my friend who was doing a PhD said, what we're going to do is we're going to take crime victims sent to us by the police in South London, and we're going to give them our techniques. And we're going to work with an organization called Victim Support, which is pretty much similar to Victim Witness in the US. So it's an organization that helps crime victims. Okay. So I said, right here. She says, well, I can't pay you, but it's the really good fun. So we were assigned, I don't know, 10 clients each, 20 clients each, something like that. This is back in the 90s. They were sent by the police. The reason the police sent them to us because they're too traumatized to stand up on the witness stand to prosecute their rapist or attacker or whatever it was. So they wanted somebody who's a better witness. What we did is we tested them. Do you have PTSD? Yes, no. If yes, okay, we don't charge you. This is completely free. We will give you up to 10 sessions and we will test you for PTSD at the end of the 10 sessions. And if we've cured you, great. And that's what we did. And we had all sorts of crime victims come to us. And they had no expectations for what we were going to do. And what we ended up with was our figure was something like 89% of the people that had been sent to us by the police and the courts no longer had PTSD. We'd finished with them. And at the end of this research project, which got written up and everything, and I said, this is just the best thing ever. I just love doing this. Can I stay on and do this as my job? And victim support says, yeah, we can't pay you much. I says, I don't care. They did pay a little. And I just did that for a while. And it was just the best thing ever. It was marvelous. Partially because private clients has a different attitude. They're coming, they're hoping that you're going to fix them. Right. These people had no expectation of getting better. Nobody said, oh, go and see Victor, he's going to make you better. They just said, go and see this man, he might be able to help you. Part of the reason it was an amazing experience is we had people from all sorts of countries and cultures. South London is very multicultural. So you've got all sorts of people with all sorts of crimes from all sorts of places. It was an amazing experience. And then after a while, I got headhunted by people in Miami. Please come and do the same thing in Miami. So I said yes, left some other people in charge, carry on doing what I was doing, and went off to Miami. And I thought I'll just come and help set them up. I helped set up a center in Miami, which is still going strong and has had over 15,000 people helped using these techniques.
Wow.
Mostly funded by a Miami-Dade police. I wanted to replicate it throughout the US, but unfortunately that didn't happen. I actually flew back to England at one point and spoke to the head of victim support for the UK. I said, let me do this in every city in the UK. A model, it won't cost you much at all. I know how to do this. I'll take charge of all the training. And they said, no, we've got to think about this. So we'll have to speak to various committees. So we'll let you know in a few months. And I said, oh, forget it. I got straight back on the plane. Then that afternoon, back to Miami. And I just carried on in Miami. And this center in Miami is still going strong. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Is the center in Miami then working with victims of crime, or are you also working with law enforcement themselves, police officers that may have gone through a traumatic incident? My
colleague in London, meanwhile, where there's terrorist incidents happening in London and the London Metropolitan Police are involved, my old friend and colleague, he runs a project in the London Metropolitan Police to address the police who've been the first responders who've been attending in these three major terrorist incidents. And he did that for quite a while. So these were the same techniques and the results were stupendous.
So you are treating in Miami both law enforcement and victims of crime?
I'm not sure about the mixture in Miami because I left Miami 20 odd years ago. I'm not up to date on what they do. All I know is that the last time I spoke to them, they said they're majorly funded by Miami-Dade Police. When I was there, most of the clients, they were domestic violence victims, most of them. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure what the mix is now. I couldn't tell you.
When you set up a center, you're training others to work with this technique, I take it. And how long does that training take for someone to learn how to do this?
4 days.
Wow, that's quick.
I'm trying to get it quicker. I had a conversation many years ago with the guy who was then the world's leading expert in PTSD in Florida. And he said, can you get it down to 2 days? I went back to my friends and colleagues and they said, well, no, I can't possibly do it in 2 days. But actually, I decided I really want to get it down to 2 days. Part of the reason for that is so you can do it over a weekend. So what I've done now is I've put all the stuff they need to learn into an app. And what I do is I say before the weekend, I want you to go through this app, which has got lots of practicals, lots of quizzes, lots of stuff. And I want you to learn in the app all the basics, understand the theory. So when we do our weekend, it's just going to be purely practical. And that's the basis on which I now do the training. And that's working well. So I can do it in the weekend. But what I do is the weekend after, I get them to come back to review how they're doing, catch up, see if anything missed out. It's a combination. It's using the app helps me keep it down to 2 days and a bit.
Victor, in promoting this technique, which you say is called TIR?
Well, let me just give you the full story on this. The technique is called TIR, which stands for Traumatic Incident Reduction. That's the technique I use when I'm giving sessions.
Okay.
But when I'm training, I have modified it. Okay, the reason I've modified it is most of the people I'm training don't have English as a first language, or do not have a high education level, or have a culture where the concepts we're using in our educated Western bubble aren't easily translatable. For instance, I'm now doing a project in one of the states of India. How do you translate this into Hindi? We're not talking educated people in Delhi or Mumbai. We're talking people in the middle of the country where there isn't a word for well, there is a Hindi word for trauma, but they've never heard of it. So you have to explain trauma. And how do you explain that? And they have ways of saying things which are kind of quite poetic. My heart is broken and this, that, and the other and the other. That's how you would start to explain trauma. You cannot just go onto Google Translate and translate this stuff. I mean, even if they speak English, they don't have the vocabulary to understand what I'm saying if I'm talking to an averagely educated person in the US. So we have to find a new way of doing this. And you can't give them a 200-page manual and say, study that and test you. This is not going to work. They need quick solutions. I've worked in places where it's almost a war zone. People are being kidnapped. People are being assaulted. The justice system is breaking down. I worked online in countries like that. And you can't do the normal stuff. You can't say, right, so we're going to do a full course. You're going to read the manual. You've got to do an internship. We're going to da, 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 da. It's just not going to work, right? I get a phone call one Christmas Eve from somebody who says, my daughter's just been shot and she's in pieces, absolute pieces. What are you going to do with that kind of thing? You actually can't do much when the trauma's just happened. You have to sort of wait because what you do when a trauma's just happened is a totally different technique. My point is that you have to be prepared to work in the culture where they determine how the training is going to happen. And because I've done training extensively in many parts of India, I'm kind of used to this idea that you can't just bring your Western idea of how to train people and transplant it into a different culture.
Yeah.
So I've got to amend it. So when I'm training an amended version of TIR, a heavily amended version, where the language is easier, the concepts are easier, the training technique is different. They don't have to read manuals. It is different, but it's an evolution for a particular situation.
Are there qualifications then for someone to learn this, to become a practitioner, a coach in TIR?
Sure. Yeah, the TIR Association runs training courses in the US and other countries. They will certify you and they will, do internships and all the rest of it. Yeah,
right,
for sure. What I do is different. What I do is find communities where there is no mental health help available. They don't have people. You can't just go to a therapist and get your depression or your anxiety or your trauma sorted.
Right.
So I'm working in a different field to that.
Yeah. Victor, if you could just freely give whatever information you would want to give to my listening audience, what else would you like to say about this technique or the coaching or becoming a coach or becoming a client? What's the best way to address this audience who mostly have experienced trauma?
I've got lots of experience of taking people who have been victims and turning them into coaches. So I've worked with human trafficking victims, I've worked with all sorts. And what I find is that if you're somebody who was a victim and I've trained you, it gets two benefits. One is your case improves drastically because you understand a lot more about what's happened to you and why. And the other benefit is that you can go and give this help to somebody else. And that's what I'm interested in doing. I want to scale up as much as possible. So I totally welcome anybody who suffered PTSD or any kind of trauma and give me the opportunity to train them so they can go and help other people. When we do the training, we come to the practicals, the weekend practical. What you do is you role play with a study partner. So you give them a session and they give you a session, but you take a topic that's not traumatic to practice with. But once you've mastered it and you've got confidence in it, then you give each other a live session. And that is the most important part of the training, is giving each other live sessions. So not only are you learning how to give this to others, you're getting your own case handled as well. That's one thing. And if you don't want to get trained, great, just come for private sessions. I give you sessions, or my colleagues will give you sessions. Either way.
Yeah. If someone wants to be a client, how do they get in touch with you?
Go to my website. I've got a WhatsApp number. I've got an email address. I've got a website. Website's got contact details. www.traumasol, solve short for solution, traumasol.org, O-R-G.
Great. It's been amazing to hear about what you do. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being willing to be on the show with me.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I love the sound of my own voice, and I love to tell everybody about what I do. So that's absolutely fine. And if anybody out there also does podcasts, I'll be happy to do another one.
Yeah. Victor, thank you for being with me today. It's been a pleasure. And I hope maybe we can do this again, get some updates on how the progress is going with getting more centers going, with more people trained, and then maybe some success stories too.
Sure, definitely.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Dave.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to express my sincere gratitude to Victor Lyons for joining us today and sharing his profound insights into trauma recovery. His work as a trauma incident reduction coach is truly transformative, and it's clear that his approach is making a significant difference in the lives of those who navigate the difficult journey of healing. Victor's dedication to creating safe, supportive spaces for survivors is both inspiring and necessary in today's landscape of trauma-informed care. His ability to connect with survivors, helping them process and heal from their experiences, is a testament to his commitment and his expertise. It's an honor to have had him on the show, and I encourage all of you to learn more about his work and consider how these trauma-informed approaches can positively impact the way we all engage with survivors. Thank you again to Victor for being part of this important conversation, and thank you to all of you for tuning in. My call to action this week is for you to share Victor's episode with everyone in your circle of influence. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform, give the show a 5-star rating, and become a follower of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories on Instagram. All of this helps spread the message of bringing justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Another great way to do this is to start by believing whenever you hear a victim of rape or sexual assault tell their story, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Be sure to join me next week for another powerful episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. We'll see you next week.